Welcome to Art with Alison. Today we'll be discussing tonal value using a teapot and a paper bag. Curious? Let's see. All right, I guess we can get started. Welcome. Let's get started. Today we have a paper bag as my paper. Why are you doing this? Why a paper bag? Honestly, this is the first thing that if you were to go into the atelier, that you'd be handed a paper bag, some charcoal, some chalk, and a kneaded eraser, and draw the sphere. This is the challenge, is seeing the middle tone. And so I'm going to do our favorite gradient, but this time I'm going to omit the middle tone, and I'm going to let the chalk and the charcoal do the work. And I'm going to let the paper bag be my middle. And this is sort of an opposite concept. Very different in how you see tone. This is something that we can now apply to our sphere. So with that in mind, I am now going to look at my sphere. With that, it's not an outline. I'm not going to do a black outline, but I'm also going to pay attention to the area around the object, defining the object. And I know that's sort of confusing, but it's basically, instead of doing a hard outline, theoretically, I'm just going to do the background to find that edge. Whoops. That's part of it too. We're always breaking charcoal and it's not too fussy. Do you see how it's simple? It's super abstract right now. I am now using my background and the darkness to define the sphere, which is the opposite of with white paper or even just using line. I'm thinking about this in a tonal way. I'm using my eyes. And actually here, let's talk about this for a second. This was the acrylic material that I was talking about, the sunglass material. Theoretically, what you would do is you would put this in front of your eyes, view the object through that, and actually let's see if we can, if you view the object through this piece, you can see how it's reducing the lighting information. And so you would draw until everything was at a certain level, you would remove a piece away, and you would then render what you saw on that. And we'll talk a little bit further on that in another next segment, but I just wanted to introduce this and show you that when I'm looking, I'll be looking sometimes, and it's the same thing as when I'm squinting. I'm reducing the lighting information so that way I don't get overwhelmed by the details, really. And it's another way of, as a collective piece, I draw based on what I see from my level and then remove it. And so it's as a group, which we'll again also be talking about in the next segment. But for now, I just want to show you really quickly, what does it mean to render the sphere using just value in the paper bag? This is something that they say, you're supposed to, you have to have the right materials, it has to be all fancy. This is literally just a paper bag, a grocery bag, some charcoal, really just simple, and some chalk. Like, this is not, it doesn't have to be fancy in order for it to be art. And I want that feeling of the barrier to entry of having it be expensive materials be the only way that you can make something beautiful. That's ridiculous. That's not how it works. So as you can see, I'm kind of using the side of my chalk. I'm not using the back or the tip of it. I'm kind of just kissing it a little bit, and then I'm also smushing it in, letting the paper come through to become that middle tone. Now I did sort of the the shadow. I'm gonna do my shadow edge. Give it a little bit of tone. I'm sort of just going off of my own memory. Now here's a point too of decision making. What I'm seeing around the edge and what I'm gonna render may be two different things, but I'm gonna use it as a way to emphasize some concepts. So here, as we get close to the wider part, I may make it really sharp and really dark. And as we get closer to that middle tone, maybe it kind of fades off. And this is what the old masters would call the lost and found edges, in the sense of forms that sort of become, there's the edge, we found it, we lose it, and then we're gonna find it again down here. And that is an example of something in portraits as well. When you're doing portraits, the lost and found edge would be the 3/4 view of a face of the nose. I gotta be careful not to touch my face. Of the nose, where say it goes from the brow, and then there's this break where the nose and the cheek meet, and it gets lost, and there's no line. And then there's just the tip of the nose comes back. That's the type of stuff that is going to determine how much do you understand, how much do you understand about the forms, because our nose and a lot of things do not have these hard black outlines around them, the entire surface. And so how do we be subtle with the way that light is behaving around these forms without having to be so obvious and heavy-handed with it? So I'm using, again, I'm going to use the background to determine this shape. I'm filling in and creating the shadow. Theoretically, too, we could also, I'm going to go in a little bit later, if horizontal, like a horizon line concept, we can play with that. There's a lot of different things of how we can adjust and push around and push and pull the object. And so now I'm going to use a little bit of light this way, maybe this way, to also find that form. Maybe I'm just going to give it a little bit of reflected light that's a little bit lighter. But as you can see, we're starting to find the shape of this sphere, and I'm not using lines. I'm not using this hard circle outline. And so we would use this value. And how you want to render, and I've talked about this in the other sessions, is how we want to render could be either hatching. And what I mean is like literally drawing a hatching of a sphere, which is kind of, let's see, hatch, hatch, hatch. Like I'm just copying my own piece, but I'm now, you see how I'm using the hatching as a way to define my sphere. So there's other ways of using rendering beyond just the soft, smooth area, or theoretically too, there's also the scrumbling, which is another one I talked about. And that's more the circle swirl. That's also an oil painting technique that you would use with a brush to sort of smoothly blend and create value. And so these are different ways of approaching rendering the form with a paper bag, with a middle toned piece of paper. You don't have to get the fancy materials at an art supply store. You can, once you want to do a nice fancy portrait. Paper bag is not going to take a lot of erasing. I'll show you. This is vine charcoal, and it's pretty soft, but it's not going to take it actually lifts out pretty good. But over time, it's going to degrade. It's going to crumble and kind of tear and fall apart. And so the more expensive pastel paper, it's expensive for a reason. It's almost like fabric in that it can be worked multiple times over and over and over again. And so practice on the paper bag, get comfortable using the tone and the material, and then you can move on to sort of the more expensive materials if you want to have a more permanent, acid-free, archival piece, but for just basic training and understanding, this is enough. You don't need to go too far in the sense of like having the specific supplies, and it's got to be a certain way. So as you can see, I'm literally just using chalk and charcoal on a paper bag, and we're able to get some tone. And so with that, I think we should wrap this one. All right, let's draw a hard surface object, something that's not fruit. Something that's shiny and a little bit different, has straight lines. Ooh, sorry. Let's not use that. This one's softer. There we go. And it's breaking my hand. Part of this too, I want you guys to see me making something raw, from scratch, not prepared, not overly presented. I want it to be the sense of seeing me just sort of do it from in this moment. That to letting go of this idea of it has to be perfect always, that it's okay to be inaccurate sometimes, or at least just see what happens, just not be so worried about precision. So I'm just trying to make decisions on what I want. I'm going to take my pencil, looking at my piece, I'm going to make some decisions and be like, again, why is she doing this? Here's my line of action. You're like, why did she just draw a squiggle? That's where sort of my eye flowed to. I sort of followed up and around, then I sort of swirled around like the teapot. And that doesn't make any sense at first, but it's a way for me to visually keep the energy of the pose, whether that's figure drawing or a teapot or a bowl of fruit. It helps me to remind myself to keep it energetically alive and sort of movement, because we do tend to want to make things too square and too organized, and we want to find a little bit of haphazardness to it. We want it to be just a little bit off. So I'm not even committing. I don't know if you notice, I'm making very random, just sort of notation shapes. Again, if someone walked in, they would not, and they didn't see my reference, they'd be like, what is that? That is not a teapot, and it shouldn't make sense. That's my point, and sort of hopefully one thing I can communicate is that we need to start out as abstract as possible, seeing these overall simple shapes, these overall on the page concepts first, and then I'm going to start kind of pulling out the detail and using the same idea with our little tone and our looking through this plastic, being able to see something and view through it. I'm going to try to lift up, starting with the brightest brights and the darkest darks, and sort of push and pull my way through. And so with that in mind, and maybe I do like lighten out even my notes a little bit, so it doesn't have to be so heavy, just to kind of give an indication. Now, it's just like quick little dots, little highlights at first. And again, I'm really just squinting. I'm really just removing all the information, just kind of taking it in, seeing really light. I'm drawing with my eraser. If you notice, I'm actually using it as a drawing tool. It's not my mistake tool. This is something that is helping me to render. I don't want to feel like, oh, I only use the eraser when I messed up. So there's no such thing. It's just paper. It's just charcoal. And we'll be okay. So I'm trying to look at these highlights. It's a balance too with something so detailed to not get too wrapped up in it right away. Again, this doesn't make sense. If someone were to walk in, they'd be like, what is that? I don't know what that is. That's not a teapot, that's for sure. But I'm slowly going to start revealing its shape. It's not about it being immediately recognizable in a way we want it to be immediately unrecognizable. Look at just the basic shapes of what's happening first, and then we can kind of pull out the details. So you can see I just did a little bit of the highlights. The challenge too is removing out some of the room light. Now I'm going to do darkest darks. I'm looking. And it's just a little bit there. I'm going a little bit here. Sort of, and even then I know it's line, but is it? Like I'm really just indicating the darkest values that I'm finding on the piece. And so here we go. I'm kind of indicating the knob a little bit, but not quite. I don't want to fully commit too much yet. Maybe, so this is a challenge too. It's a little bit in foreshortened perspective. I'm going to draw that. Pull that forward a little bit. And we'll talk a little bit more about perspective as well and composition in another session. But for now, I just want to show, what does this mean? I'm not worrying about being precise. Again, this is not something that we have to show the people that we're going to show the reference to and have them sit there and compare and contrast and measure it and be like, oh, it's 2 centimeters over to the side. Like, it doesn't matter. As long as it reads as a general concept of a teapot when we're done, then we have done our job. And that's the most important thing. So with that, I'm just going to keep pushing through. The challenge too is with metal, with reflections. Obviously, it's very bright. There's a lot of highlights, and there's also the gradient from middle tone and shadows can be really short. So I'm going to, let's see if I can, let's add a little bit. I'm going to follow along the body, give it a little bit of shadow. Kind of follow that. Which again, I'm going to possibly use the background. I'm seeing its own cast shadow. It's kind of going up along the box, and so I'm going to At first I was like, I'm gonna put that in. No, sometimes, so that's part of it too, is we can edit. We can make educated decisions based on what we're seeing and how it works within the piece. I am dropping charcoal. So let's see, that's kind of going, which will mean I'm gonna wanna pop out. Back and forth, it's always a seesaw, back and forth of doing a little bit of charcoal, adding a little bit of the eraser, and kind of go and push and pull. And even then I feel like this needs to come down a little bit. It's just drafting it out. I'm playing with it. There's a lot of energy. It doesn't have to be this perfect example of it. It can be, I don't want to just see it from close up either. It should be reading at best between 5-6 feet away at minimum. You shouldn't have a drawing and someone has to go and look up close in order to understand what they're seeing. It should be able to read, theoretically, according to my training, is that it should read as though you were in a museum, standing and looking at the piece, which is usually about 5 or 6 feet away because they don't let you get too close to touch it. But there's something to that theoretically the best pieces are the ones that read from across the room. That 20, 30, 50, 100 feet away makes so much sense, and all of a sudden you're just like, whoa, that thing's alive. And then you get up close and it's just a whole bunch of squiggles and dots or whatever. But it's all about understanding the bigger piece as a whole and as that works, and what that means as it reads in space. And so now I'm starting to make some more commitments to detail, right? You're seeing me kind of commit a little bit more. I'm deciding, making some decisions. I'm gonna pull this down. Do I like that line? No, I think I'm gonna take it out. And that's okay. We can, it's about finding it. Woo, is that more? Possibly. And I might even take it down a notch this way too. Because sometimes it's, again, we don't always have these solid black lines. Here, this edge is darker. There we go. So we're finding it, we're creating a sense of volume based on the sort of overall feel of the piece, the background. I'm playing with a lot of different elements to be able to bring this piece into a unified drawing. That if someone were to look at it immediately, they'd be like, oh, it's a teapot. And that's the goal, right? It's like, we only have like 3 seconds. The wonderful Doug Chang, who I had the great honor of being able to work for when I worked for Disney and Image Movers Digital, he talks about that in the concept of design and how long the viewer has to really process what they see. And so roughly 3 seconds is what a designer has to capture the audience for them to understand and read what they're seeing. That's not a lot of time. So it better make sense real fast is pretty much what he's saying. If it doesn't make sense, if it's too busy or kind of convoluted, your brain's just kind of like, I don't care. It's not very interesting. I'm having to work too hard to be able to figure out what is happening. We want to make the viewers, we want to make it easy for them. But then at the end of the day too, there's that fine balance. You also don't want to tell the whole story. You want them to also be a participant. And so I feel like sometimes having those hyper-real rendered, every detail, every pore can be a bit soulless because you don't let the viewer participate. One thing too is I'm kind of drawing and rendering and I'm using my eye. I'm also using my eyes in a way that would be unconventional in that I'm looking at this piece, sort of strange. I'm looking at this piece with my eyes peripherally. You're like, what? I use my peripheral vision. I'm not looking it straight on. I mean, there's times, of course, where I'm looking at the detail and I'm like, detail. But there's also times where I'm looking at it just right now in the corner of my eye. And does that make sense in the corner of my eye? That idea of not really being precise with it actually kind of, it helps to see it from a different perspective. It helps to see, does it even read abstractly from afar? Does it make sense? And that's the type of stuff that's why the squinting, there's all these things of really what we're doing is we're upending and changing and questioning, challenging our perception. We think we know something. When we start drawing something, so we draw a face, we're doing a portrait, immediately we'll start putting in our own face and our own nose because subconsciously our brain is like, oh yeah, I know what a nose is because it's seen your nose your entire life. So it just fills in the blank and it's like path of least resistance. Here's a nose, there you go. or your short order cook, ding. But we have to fight that. We have to fight our brain's desire to be lazy, really, or to be just the least amount of effort. So that's where the idea of making it be abstract. It's not saying I'm drawing a teapot. I'm saying I'm drawing this sort of rounded shape with these little things up on top. And if you start to see it from a shape point of view, you stop worrying about it being perfect. So with that, I think I'm gonna stop. I could keep going. We could easily just, it's like how far down the rabbit hole do you wanna go? I'm gonna try to add a little bit more highlights. Actually, see, let's give a little bit more pop to this lid, just a tiny bit. And it's like, this is the final piece. This is the like final last looks. You really, I don't want it to be, because it's a loose drawing, I don't want it to be too precise. I don't want it to be too accurate. Again, like we talk about, it's not worth it. Now I'm going to add just a tiny splash of chalk because it is so metally, and hopefully it picks up on the camera. Look at that. And this is, again, the last, when I'm using the chalk as the highlights, this is like final. We should really be wrapping it up in that way at this point. Whoops. If we're at that last phase. So this is really like, theoretically, when you get to the highlight phase, I'm just kind of processing now and going through each of them. And there we go. So we have a teapot. That should be a quick tonal study of something that's hard surface and reflective and metallic and ceramic and lots of different shapes and foreshortening. We got a lot of layers added to this, but I'm going to show a evolution of the teapot. This is teapot number 4. So I will show you 1, 2, and 3 next, coming up. All right, welcome back to the teapots. This is an example of all of the evolution of the teapots. When I first started drawing at online in March of 2020, when the lockdown and everything, I hadn't drawn in years. And this was something I had done back at the atelier a long time ago, and so I could draw. I just had been out of practice. And when I started drawing again, I had my teapot. I was teaching online, had my little setup. This was my first teapot. This teapot, first teapot. It's a teapot, but it was a little awkward. I was a little frenetic, and I was a little like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm gonna try. Energetically, it's there, but there was a lot of things that I had forgotten about, and I was reawakening, basically. And so this was teapot number 2 after drawing regularly and teaching online regularly. This is about 10, 20-minute drawing. This is about a 5 or 10-minute drawing, and I'm teaching and talking still about these same tonal concepts. If I had stopped at the first teapot, I would not be able to have then found the third teapot. This was after 3 or 4 months of drawing the same teapot and talking about it and teaching it online. I had expectations of this, but my reality was this. When I first started doing the drawing online, my reality was not where my expectations were, and I was upset, of course, but I also knew that I had to put in the work. I hadn't been drawing regularly, many months, many hours of practice, was slowly finding it, getting control back again with my hands to be able to find the third teapot. And really, if we go, this is now 4th teapot. This guy is the evolution of that. This is the sort of next phase. Obviously we just drew this on camera. If I had given up on my first teapot, I wouldn't have found my 4th teapot. I want to show also this example of the gradients. When I'm talking about tonal value and what does it mean to build up, when I'm drawing any of these drawings, whether it's on the paper bag or any of this stuff, you want to see, so I did an example basically that at in the beginning of your drawing, it should start out like that. It should be this simple, this basic, this light, this general, that when you see through with the acrylic, that this is all the information that you're getting, and you're pretty much just matching what you're seeing. Then in the next phase, we're adding a little bit more light and a little bit more darkness, again using the background value to bring out the value and the shape of the form of the object. Next phase, we're adding a little bit more detail. We're actually getting some facial features in there. There's a little bit, but still not a lot of dark darks or light lights. And then this is the final one. And as you can see, it's a collective, cohesive, all-encompassing entire page finished in this level first. And then we move up, and then we move on to the next, and then we move up to the next. Once the entire page has been addressed at that tonal level, is then can we move on to the next phase. If I had done the entire tonal level of, say, the eye or the face, but I had completely neglected all of the other parts, it would not be cohesive. And so that's just something that I want to pay attention to, that when I'm drawing or when you're drawing or trying to attempt doing a tonal study, you saw me build up from the beginning all the way up. We didn't do over detail in one area first and then try to catch up with the rest. This is a cohesive entire process. And so hopefully that'll make a little bit more sense when we're trying to draw and be a little bit less hard on yourself, as well as hoping that you don't give up after the first teapot. I think I easily could have given up. I easily could have said, you know what, I'm just not at the level I used to be. And I know that there's a lot of artists out there that maybe life has changed, or just they haven't been able to maintain practice, because it's really like, as an athlete, you have to stay in shape with it, keep it maintained. And if you don't have it maintained, you will fall out of practice, but it doesn't go away. It's just, you just have to recreate that muscle memory. It's there in a lot of ways, a lot easier to tap into than you realize. You just have to push through that first teapot. And I think if I had given up at the first teapot, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to make the fourth. And I think that that's hopefully a lesson for you as well, is that you don't know what you will create next. So don't give up because of whatever you're making right now isn't up to your standards. Just wait. It will get better. You will get better. Progress, not perfection, is the key. So next episode, we'll be discussing all things fabric and how folds and behavior of fabric. So stay tuned.